Welcome to Story Hour, a virtual meetup hosted by Wolf and Heron.
What came to mind for me, so you all know this, I do partner dancing, not so much in the last year, but I do. And what has really amazed me about it is just, I started it because I thought it would be cute and fun and something that I saw in the movies. And what has really amazed me is just how much it has worked itself into my brain and my soul, kind of, which I don't use that lightly because I'm not the kind of person that has things work into their soul really, ever. And I joined thinking it would just be something cute and fun. And now, 6 years on, I realized that it does so much more. And so last year when I was applying for jobs, I was feeling kind of frustrated. Nothing was coming through, obviously. And when that happens to me, generally what I do is I go back and revamp my writing. And so the cover letters that I was sending, I just wasn't happy with them anymore, because they all felt really plain and boring. And so I considered, how could I make this a livelier story? And what I ended up finding as I went on this sort of weird little side journey, was that in all the skills that I use in my everyday work and all the skills that I need to have for that, a lot of it has been impacted, can be impacted, is improved and affected by the way that I dance. And so, so for example, the fact that dancing is a conversation, we talk about that a lot, that it's a conversation between the two partners. And just because one person's leading doesn't mean that they have final say in everything, that they're asking their follow to do something and the follow agrees to do that. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they don't agree. And then we move on, and we try something else. And just like that, when I'm doing, community charrettes, engagement processes, all of that is a conversation. I might be leading it as a project manager, as a landscape designer. I might be leading that process, and I might be providing my expertise and my guidance in that process. But that doesn't mean I have final say in what happens in a space, because fundamentally, if I don't have community buy-in, oops, I did my job wrong. And so that's one thing. The confidence boost is absurd when you have that. I spent, the first year or so partner dancing, standing in the corner, waiting for someone to ask me. And after that, I switched dances, not because of that, but a little bit. Switched dances, found a better environment. And then I figured out finally that lesson that my parents have been trying to tell me for years, which is if you don't ask for things, they don't happen. So that was another one. Let me think. The attention to detail and the broad scale thinking, the fact that you have to be aware of you and your partner and the other people around you and the dance floor and the tempo. All of that is so akin to my job, where I have to be aware of everything about the people and the timing and the space around me and, maybe the weather. I don't know. Definitely for my job. Yeah. So all of that, it really feeds into it. And so anyway, I'm trying to see. I worked out, the ability to communicate, all of that is so important in dance, and it's so important everywhere else. And so I worked out a cover letter that blended those things together. And I've given you more of a recap of the cover letter than an actual story, but that's the bones here.
Yay! Thank you, Neha. That was awesome. Let's talk about Neha's story. So what was powerful? What was awesome? What should Neha hold on to? Go ahead, Kara. Get us started again.
Well, I think this is a harder prompt, but what I really appreciated is that both of your metaphors, Bart's and Neha's, worked as metaphors, but it feels like they're doing slightly different things. So Bart's felt more to me like, let me help you see this, share this insight so that you don't have to learn it for yourself. Neha's, yours felt more like, you may not understand this. I feel like you're missing something. So let me give you a different way of thinking about it that may help you understand it. And so it's just kind of cool to think about the different uses of metaphor because of that, like when it might be a good version of a story to think about working. But I like the idea of dancing as a conversation and what it can show you about observation, intentionality, attentiveness, awareness, all of that stuff that is so relevant in conversation. It makes me think of like verbals versus nonverbals. Like that feels like a very wonderful and powerful metaphor that there's a lot of people that are bad at communicating. So if somebody who you feel like is that you're working with that is just like tripping up on something, to give them a different way of thinking about communication that's not just about speaking, but that's also about this interplay between two people, I think is just a really compelling way to think about communication and conversation. So I really loved that element of the potential metaphor as an idea to build upon.
Yeah. I mean, I like I think there's a multitude of different ways you can tie the experience of dancing and communicating with somebody on this level with how you want to be as a worker, as an employee, as a project manager, whatever it may be, that you're working on, or communicator with your people. I think it's kind of an endless trough of information, really. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's true. It in some ways, I think it's like the strength and maybe also the challenge is that the metaphor works for so many things, and figuring out how to deliver that metaphor and keep it tight at the same time is probably something that you kind of have to like play with and stretch into and try. But it's very rich metaphor, which is great as a starting point for sure. What else was good about the story for Neha?
I'd be interested to know like how much more it affected your letter, your cover letter, like what specifically it did. Like, did you actually write about like the dancing and the work, or like how did that? Because I didn't really understand that tie-in, but I'm very interested in it.
Right, there was
how it all ended up in the end, like one thing leading the other.
That plot line was actually quite fun. Was like, like I had this cover letter that wasn't doing it, and so I like did this little journey, and then I came up with this new cover letter. So that's definitely a story plot line that you could blow out, right? Like really blow up and blow out. And to Bart's point, it's like there's a curiosity there. So that's the foundation of a good story is people want to know what came next, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
What about experiments? What are some ways that Neha could make the story more compelling?
I think, Stephanie, you mentioned maybe what is one of the harder things, and I feel like you noticed this, Neha, is that you can extrapolate so many different themes from one concept, and then it's going to be trying to do too much if you incorporate all of them. So the practice would be like, maybe it's interesting for you to, in the next few months, try to mention dancing as a metaphor to people in conversation to make a point, and not even necessarily just also tell a story, but kind of see where it comes up most often, where you're like, oh, that's an interesting connection. Let me mention that reminds me of dancing. And this is how it reminds me of dancing, just so you can start to play around with maybe the most frequent or the most compelling uses of that metaphor. And then what you would also want to do is, how do you ground it in space and time? If it's a moment of standing next to the wall, if it ends up being about confidence and like finding the courage to ask somebody to dance like that, I can kind of picture, if it's about something else, if it's about more of listening to your partner or something like that, is there a moment where you remember being in a room and they indicated that they didn't want to go in the direction, and then you feel like, can you find the moment? I wouldn't maybe worry about that to start, because I'm sure you have little moments like that. I guess, I would experiment and play around with, can you identify the most useful opportunities for this metaphor and let that guide you with how to ground it in time and space.
Yeah. One of the metaphors that often comes up for me when I think about dancing, and in particular partner dancing, and you kind of hinted at this, but this, like, you've got a leader, but the follower may or may not follow. And what's interesting about that is that the more that I played with being a follower for myself, I learned how much leadership there is in the followership. Right. Because fundamentally, especially in salsa, maybe this is where it comes from, but especially in salsa, the follower is what's on display. Right. And so like,
and that's
the followers,
case, I think, with a lot of, like, even Zouk with all the head movement and ballroom with all the spangly dresses, like, it's very similar.
Right. So there's it's like your job is to, like, yes, you follow the leader's lead, but you're also the one being on show. And so in a lot of ways, you have to take the lead that the leader gives you and extrapolate on it and build it and make it better. And so you're responsible
for making the lead look good too. Because I've had plenty of, like, very inexperienced leads lead me and be like, oh my God, you're making me look so good. Thank you. And
right.
That's so my job as a follower too.
So there's something in there too. It's like some metaphor about, like, what does really leadership even look like? Which I guess maybe I'm predisposed to always be looking for metaphors about leadership because I'm running a leadership company, but it's something to think about too. I think the sort of the thing that I would challenge you to play with, and maybe this is more of what Kara was saying, is to ground it in place and time, is try to give your story more specificity and plot. And, like, is it the story? And, like, yes, maybe it is the story of, I have this cover letter that I want to rewrite, and I went on this intellectual, like, thought experiment and came up with a new cover letter. That could be our story, but it could also very much be a story about an experience in dance, followed by a 2-sentence things like, oh, and that, like, you know, I noticed that also in my life here when I'm negotiating with my clients. Right. And you know, and I think there's 10 ways that you could take it. It's almost like you have 10 stories in there.
I'm sure there are.
So, yeah. What else could Neha experiment with?
Yeah, again, I'd echo that. It would be really nice to have, like, a specific thread on that, because it is so nebulous. It'd be nice to have a specific thread through line of, like, you know, this either I was trying to get this done and this helped me get it done, or this, I did this and it led to this, you know, a specific outcome.
Yeah.
That you were, because I kind of lost the meaning of the story after a while of the cover letter by the time we got to the end. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Well, so it's interesting because this is also reminding of when we're leading workshops, sometimes we'll say, it may be easier to think of the story idea first and then figure out theme. And sometimes the opposite is true, where there's a really relevant theme or use case to tell a story. And then you can think about, okay, if this is the theme, if this is the reason I'm telling the story, if this is the why of the story, what experience or observation have I had that I can turn into a story because it shares that message, it shares that theme. And so I think because dancing could mean so many things and it's really personal to you, that's what I think it may be interesting to try to identify, like, what are the right moments? What are the most important themes for me? And how can I use my emotional connection and experience with dancing to craft a powerful story for those purposes? Because then you can kind of like, it really opens the universe. There are 1,000 potential stories, and you'll be able to speak to like pull a bunch of different threads, as long as you know your why, right? You're going to have the personal experience to back it up. Or even like the thing that comes to mind somewhat to me is that JoJo Siwa, Dancing with the Stars, is the first time she's partnered, it's lady and lady together. Right. And so like, there could be if there's something about like, what does it mean to be a leader? The story could be about that, but based on an observation you have about something that you noticed in dancing, or you see two people in conversation and it reminds you of dance, and here's why. But all of that crafting requires you to understand what you want the point of the story to be. And so I would think about that, like, for you as a human, for you as a leader, for you as an employee at any organization, what are the things that you want to speak to? And how could your perspective on dancing, your experience with dancing, enable you to speak to those things powerfully?
Visit wolfandheron.com to find out more about our story hours.